have a very, very special guest, like no one else I've ever interviewed. His name is Efraim Abrams. He's from Long Island. He's all of 23 today and graduated high school in the United States, but went off to Israel and became a lone soldier. And Efraim, it's great to meet you. We talked, Efraim, you were in Gaza fighting to protect on behalf of the Jewish people, risking your life. First of all, could you just tell us, how did you end up in Israel, in the army, and then ultimately being in Gaza, one of the first soldiers to actually enter on October 27th, after the October 7th massacre that took place? Joining the army, putting your life on the line, what's that all about? How did that happen?
So, I guess I'd have to go back to my upbringing. I was born in New York. I came from a family who escaped Europe. My family came in the 20s to America. They escaped anti-Semitism in Poland. My grandmother, she escaped Nazi Germany in 1938. My father, he was an Israeli commando. He served, and he saw not too little battle. And I grew up in a house where you grew up with an ideology that when you turn 18, you go and protect the Jewish people. When I was a baby, we moved to Israel. I lived there for about 10 years. Then we moved back to the States, long story. And when I was in high school, I had two options: either go to college or go to the army. And it was just a no-brainer to me that I was going to go and serve my people. And I saw what was going on in college campuses with anti-Semitism and just a whole wave of ideology that I did not agree with. And I got on a flight, made Aliyah, and I went to Israel. And when I got to Israel, I went to a pre-military school called Keshet in the Golan Heights. After I finished my time in Keshet, I then drafted to the IDF.
Okay. You end up on the border at Gaza on October 7th. Literally at the very beginning, you are sent to be there with your unit. And we'll talk about the unit that you were a commander of, the D9. When that happened, the horrors that took place on October 7th, you get to the border, things are raw. What exactly is your experience being there almost at the very, very beginning?
Well, I guess on October 7th, it was a holiday. I was in Jerusalem. And I guess I'll go back to my October 7th story, how it even began. The week before October 7th was the holiday of Sukkot. And I had off from the army. I was off for about a week. And October 6th came as a Friday. And all my friends and I were just relaxing and planning together the holiday of Simchat Torah. And that Friday night, if anyone knows about Simchat Torah, you dance with the Torah,
Very happy time.
Very happy. If you're 22, you're also drinking a lot. So that Friday night with my friends from Keshet, we gathered together in Jerusalem. We went to the Western Wall, then we went to the streets in Jerusalem. And we were dancing. And then about 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, we decided, it's time to go home, to go to sleep. So we go home, we go to sleep. Now, before Shabbat, I set an alarm to go wake up so I could go to prayer. And my alarm goes off, 7 o'clock in the morning. Think nothing about it, but too tired. I wake up, but I'm still drunk from the night before. So I just go back to sleep. And then my phone goes off again. It goes off at 8 o'clock in the morning. Now, I didn't put another alarm on, and there could only be one thing. I look at my phone. I see my officers call me. Now, I'm religious, I keep Shabbat, so I can't touch anything electronic. But in the IDF, if you get a phone call on Shabbat from the army, you have to pick it up. If it's an emergency, you always have to be on call, on standby. So I get a phone call. And my officer, he tells me, Efraim, a couple of terrorists infiltrated the border.
A couple of terrorists.
Infiltrated the border, and they're firing rockets towards Israel. Now, I didn't really think much of it. Like, it's happened before, terrorists have infiltrated the border, and
not a big deal.
Like, really nothing. Like, the army probably has under control. So I get up, I go brush my teeth, and it's about 8:10, 8:15, and I live right by this near bus station in Jerusalem. Anyone who knows about Jerusalem knows that's like the center of Israel. All of a sudden, air raid goes off, and I'm like, it's the center of Israel. Like, air raids don't go off here, and I knew right there that a war broke out. I knew just there was something. If I got called on Shabbat, something's going on. I wake up my roommate, tell him, listen, I go to the bomb shelter. There's an air raid going on, and even he didn't think anything of it. He went back to sleep. After about an hour, 2 hours, the messages start coming in. They start calling everyone back to base. And my unit is combat engineering, and this unit, if it gets called up, all hell broke loose. And we got called up. And that October 7th, we didn't know what was really going on at to the scale that we know today.
At what point were you aware of the horrors that were committed in Gaza? At what point? Is it when you arrive there and you find out exactly? I mean, you were there literally at the beginning.
I knew in the environment that I was in, the atmosphere, everything changed. At 10:30, I got a phone call to go get a bus from Jerusalem, pick up a bus on Shabbat, and pick up everyone from the Jerusalem district to take them back to base. And I knew right there that this is much bigger than what
something serious is happening here.
I mean, my father and my aunt, they would tell me stories about the Yom Kippur War because they lived in Israel during the Yom Kippur War. And they tell me on Yom Kippur everyone was getting called up, and from synagogue they were getting called up, and there were lists, and people were in the streets on uniform. And I remember the week before it was the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, so I was by my aunt, and she was telling me the stories. And a week later, exactly, I'm living in the same exact world where I see soldiers, 18-year-olds getting on uniform on Shabbat morning. This guy is from the paratroopers. This guy is from infantry. This guy's from tanks. Everyone's going to different places, and we're all telling each other, "Stay safe, stay safe." I don't know if that guy survived. I don't know what happened to him. And
so you end up literally on October 7th on the border?
No. So October 7th. So before October 7th, we were in the Golan Heights in training.
Right.
So all of our armored vehicles are up in the Golan, and we had to go get them. All of our equipment, everything, our explosives, our armored vehicles. So the bus goes. We're speeding up north. Like, this whole thing is happening in just a matter of hours. We make it to the north, to the Golan. We make it to the base, and there's just chaos on the base. Everyone's just working at full capacity, trying to get all the equipment ready. And within 48 hours, we found ourselves already on the border of Gaza, waiting for the invasion.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when you got there, things were still raw. I was there literally a few days after, and I saw the cars by the hundreds and hundreds with bullet holes. I mean, it was an unbelievable sight. And and the fires and the smoke and what did you find? What did you discover? Literally, when you were there those first few days, you must have heard everything that had happened. Tell us.
So, when we went down, before I went down, first 48 hours, we started seeing all the messages that were leaking on Telegram, because it was all being leaked on Telegram, and we started to see the horrors. Now, I went to my soldiers, and I told them...
You started seeing the horrors?
The horrors of what happened, and the numbers of the people and the names, it was 100, 200, 300, and just kept getting more and more and more. And I was telling my soldiers, whatever you do not watch the footage, because right now they're doing psychological warfare on us. And of course, you see
that footage was so.
If you see roadkill, you're gonna look. So that's what they did.
And what was in that footage? I mean, just briefly describe. People have to realize what this was all about.
I refused to watch the footage for months. I wouldn't watch the footage.
Wow.
Because I knew what people were telling me, and I didn't want to lose my focus. my focus was to defeat the enemy that did this.
You mean you knew it was so horrible
Yeah.
that it would affect you
Yeah.
in terms of you being a soldier?
Yeah. And I remember first time I really looked at these videos was about 9 months after October 7th.
Wow.
I decided, let's look at it. It's time I see it. And I came across footage that things my grandparents told me about from the Holocaust. And there's things that that are so hard to even speak about. And obviously people have to speak about what they saw because there's a truth that has to be said. But I think the one thing that really was just the hardest thing I saw was a pregnant woman who they live. This was live footage. Now obviously not live, but I just saw the footage afterwards. They cut her open and took the baby out.
You're seeing this woman is alive when they're doing it.
And they're torturing her. And you can see in the video that they're taking the baby out. The baby's, it's just a few months away from being born. And I don't know how gruesome you want me to get, but I spoke to a friend of mine back in January, and he told me about this story. And he came to that kibbutz. I believe it was in near Oz. I'm not exactly sure which kibbutz. And he went into the building, into the house, to see if anyone was alive, and he saw this woman with a baby outside of her uterus.
Oh, God.
And what is so gruesome about it is that when he saw this woman, she was dead, and there was semen all over her. They raped her, they took the baby out, and tortured her. And that's the enemy we're dealing with. And I didn't know, and I heard about this story on October 7th, but I didn't watch it. And there were videos of soldiers who they were completely ambushed on their military posts. They took out their eyes, they mutilated them. And I was telling my soldiers, you cannot watch this because it will affect you psychologically.
Oh my God.
Yeah. This is a real enemy. This is real evil. This is not a video game. This is reality.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you're on the front lines. The Air Force is doing its job, but on October 27th, I think it is, the Israeli army is ordered to move in to Gaza to deal with Hamas. So first, you are the commander of a D9. I never quite knew what that was. Now I'm almost becoming an expert. Just tell our audience, what is a D9? Because from what I understand, the people in the D9, they are literally the first people to cross the border. No one, everybody else is behind. The guys in the tanks, the guys in the armored vehicles. You guys are number one to move in. You, the American, 22 years old, from Long Island, you are in the front lines. Tell us what the D9 is and what is the purpose of this D9.
So I guess before I answer about what a D9 is, I have to answer about what the entire unit is. D9s are under Combat Engineering Corps, and our task is to destroy anything the enemy leaves in front of us that will create a barrier for us to continue moving forward in the battle.
So things like IEDs,
landmines,
right?
Even just infrastructure that they created. And in this unit, one of the units, you have the explosive part of the unit, and we have the armored construction vehicles part of the armored construction vehicles, which is part of the unit. And originally I was in the explosives unit, but then when I became a commander, I went to commander school. I was dispatched to the D9 unit. I was under the 601st Battalion, and this battalion was the first one in, and they're still in. Since the beginning they've been in. These people have been working their butts off. But what is the D9 and what is this unit? So the D9 is this killdozer, I guess the best way to call it. Massive 2-story tall armored bulldozer from Caterpillar.
So a second, it's 2 stories. Someone is driving it. They're on top or bottom.
So you have 2 people in the D9. You have the D9 operator and you have the D9 commander. I was the D9 commander, and this vehicle is one of the most armored vehicles in the IDF. And
in other words, it's protected from...
Look, it's protected to an extent.
Right, not 100%.
Right, nothing's 100%. But what we are tasked with and what we grew up with in the D9 world is that we go first on every single mission. And the reason we go first is because we have to ensure that there's no IEDs, there's no explosives hidden on a wall. And in this...
So are you dealing with buildings, and are you dealing with tunnels? Are you dealing with all of that?
So we were taught that Gaza is our playing ground. What do I mean by that? The Hamas used the infrastructure in Gaza for their urban warfare tactics. And in order to destroy guerrilla warfare in an urban environment, you have to destroy the infrastructure, because every single form of infrastructure that the Hamas uses is used as a strategic point to fight against the Israelis. So we go in first. Any house, any tall building that has... We can't take down tall buildings, but we could break down the walls because they might be hiding in there, or they might leave improvised explosive devices. And we also destroy the road, because in the road they could...
Also because of IEDs, right?
Right now in Jenin, what they're doing, they have improvised explosive devices under the ground where civilians live.
So when an Israeli truck or vehicle is moving, it will blow up.
Yep. And the D9 is a chunk of steel. So if something blows up, most of the time, nothing happens to it. But the reason it's such a key component of this war, it's because once we destroy the infrastructure, they don't know how to fight without that infrastructure. They were taught in their terrorist training camps all around the world, whether it was in Iran or Afghanistan, they were taught to fight guerrilla warfare with urban tactics. They're incredible at urban warfare and guerrilla urban warfare. And the D9s were destroying the infrastructure because they use 100% of the infrastructure in Gaza towards terrorism.
Right. So let me ask you, the world is very, very upset, almost everybody, that Israel is destroying and causing such destruction. You see pictures on CNN and other networks, this horrible destruction, and what is your response to it as a soldier, having to actually destroy the infrastructure? And we'll also talk about that other issue that is extremely important, civilians, who are there, that Hamas is using the civilians. So let's deal with both of these very critical issues. Number one, just destroying things. You see these pictures of entire areas being destroyed. Is there a choice, really? And number two, the issue, which we'll talk about in a moment, the civilian population. So first, just the destruction that's taking place.
So Hamas, like I said before, they fight using the infrastructure in Gaza. Now, if you know anything about how Gaza is built, it's the most densely populated place in the world. Now, the reality is that's not so true. The Gazans all live in such closed quarters, but there is open land around. Now, the way they built Gaza was strategically built. Every infrastructure that was built, a house, a civilian home, a school, a mosque, every single hospital, was used for the use of terrorism.
Can I ask you, you saw this yourself?
100%. Every single
With
time.
your own eyes, you saw these, explosives, missiles, etc., right there in a hospital, in a mosque, a school, UNRWA, etc. Tell me, you with your eyes witnessed this?
So I'll tell you, we were taught that Hamas always has this, and we didn't really understand how extreme it was. I think after about like a month in Gaza, we started to laugh when they would get on the radio and say, "We gotta go to a school." If we got to a school, we knew there was going to be action. A school, a children's school. They have like this graffiti of Mickey Mouse and all these of all these like characters.
Disney characters.
Yeah, and right next to it is a rocket launching site aimed towards Israel, and right next to that is a tunnel, and you're just thinking to yourself, they really fooled the entire world. The way I explain how Gaza is built on a society level is almost like a pyramid scheme. If if you're at the bottom of the food chain, it's probably because you weren't supporting Hamas. And the incentive to make money and a living in Gaza is the more you support Hamas, the more money you'll make.
Why is that?
Because so Hamas, when you support Hamas, your life is going to be better in Gaza. Why? Because Hamas is in control of Gaza. Hamas controls everything. They're the military of Gaza. And no one can stand up against Hamas. They don't have the means to do it. So for 20 years, Gaza is isolated. And for 20 years, Hamas is ruling Gaza. And anyone who's not supporting them is going to die or is going to live a horrible, horrible life. So everybody wants to support Hamas because I'm not going to live a life that's... Why would I live a life...
So wouldn't you say that all the jobs that are available within that structure, that it all goes through Hamas?
Yeah.
They're the ones in charge.
All of it.
I want to hear more because, CNN and the others are telling us a different story. I want to know more about what you personally saw as you entered different areas. Did you see anything at an UNRWA facility?
No.
You sure about that? United Nations Relief Work Agency?
My unit, we made it to the UNRWA facility in northern Gaza, the main UNRWA facility in Gaza. And the first D9 that went was my friend and his operator. They took down the wall of this UNRWA facility. And in the UNRWA facility, they saw an elevator shaft. This elevator shaft went underground, not above ground.
Right.
And I'm not getting too much into detail what they discovered, what they found, but they found a massive tunnel network there under the UNRWA building, a tunnel network used by Hamas. The world tells you we have to fund UNRWA, we have to support that, we need them, they're important. The United Nations, we need them, they're so important. But we were such suckers in the Western world for supporting this organization that behind our backs was funding global terrorism. Yes, global, because Iran is funding Hamas, and if they're funding Hamas...
So UNRWA, private homes, schools, did you see this same setup? Can you describe that to us?
So, like I said before, Hamas is well trained in urban warfare guerrilla tactics. And they're not suckers, they're not idiots, they know that we're from the West. And the West, they fight their wars in a nice and lawful manner. They're not from the West, they don't fight their wars like that. So they use it to their advantage. They use the Western warfare laws for their advantage. Okay, so we're going to use the civilian population and we're going to brainwash them to be ideological about Islam and Sharia law and becoming shaheeds, jihad, and we're going to brainwash them and our society. And at the same time, they're going to be okay with it when we build infrastructure with rocket launching sites next to it, with tunnels under it. And Hamas, they did a good job with the billions of dollars they got because it all went to terrorism. I tell people don't look at Gaza as just an area with buildings. It's not just 3-dimensional; it's 4, 5, 6-dimensional. What do I mean by that? Because you see Gaza, you see buildings, but what you see on the bottom, what you don't see on the bottom, I should say, is miles upon hundreds of miles of tunnels. Tunnels you can't even stand in. You literally have to, in some of them, use a small little motorcycle or buggy just to get through. Why? Because they use it to transport missiles, rockets, explosives.
What kind of contact did you have with civilians in Gaza? What was your experience with the civilian population that you came in contact with?
So, regarding the civilian population of Gaza, because you can't not talk about the civilians in Gaza because there's over 1 million of them, and if Gaza is a very densely populated area, so you're obviously going to encounter them. Now, before we went in, it took us about 20 days from October 7th to October 27th to invade Gaza, and part of the reason we didn't do that is because we had to make sure that northern Gaza was evacuated from the civilian population. Now, if we go back to those 2-3 weeks, Hamas was stopping the Gazan civilian population from fleeing to southern Gaza. Why? Because the whole tactic they had
is to use the civilians.
To use them as human shields. Because they know that we're going to come. We're not going to shoot the civilians because we can't and we won't, because that's not what we came to do. That's not our intentions. Civilians are civilians. Terrorists are terrorists. Two different.
When you guys, as a soldier, your unit, the others, etc., what were the instructions from your commanders, the higher up people, in terms of the civilians of Gaza? Did they say, "Look, we don't, a lot of them are our enemies as well, because we know that on October 7th, a lot of the people that came into the communities in the south participated in the massacre of the Jews. So we know that. But were you given instructions like in terms of the civilians of Gaza?
So, if we go back to the videos that were spread on October 7th, we saw that the civilian population was also as extreme as everyone. They were extreme. They are extreme. And they cheered the bodies that were coming in from the Nova Festival and the...
They were doing what?
They were cheering them on when they were coming into Gaza, into the streets, into the urban environment of Gaza, into the city centers.
They were celebrating.
They were celebrating. They were throwing candies and cheering. There's a video of a boy spitting on one of the dead body hostages. And we knew what this population is. But if you're unarmed, you're a civilian. There's nothing. The rule is, and till this day still is, and for any humane military, if they're not armed, you can't touch them. And I'll tell you an example that we had. We were once with our motorcade in a place called Darj El Tufah in Gaza, and our mission for the day was to go and find rocket launching sites, because they're everywhere in Gaza. So we went and we found a bunch of rocket launching sites that day. But as we're moving forward,
how do you find that? How do you go find rocket launchers? How do you do that?
Well, that's the whole thing with the D9. It's a massive bucket we put in the ground, and we start digging, and you start to find the rocket launching sites that are there. But regarding what I'm saying with the civilian population is, that morning we went with our motorcade, and the civilian population is being fled down south in safe zones. We created safe zones so the civilians could go down. And while this was happening, my motorcade, we stumbled upon 3 civilians.
Right, a mother and 2 children.
A mother and 2 children. Now, the 2 children had 2 backpacks on them.
How old were the kids?
6, 7, maybe 8.
And a mother.
Right. And they had 2 backpacks on them, and they're stuffed. They're about to pop open the bags, and they're right next to our vehicles. We're talking 10 feet maximum, and we're looking at each other and we're like, oh my gosh, this is gonna be one of those scenarios.
Maybe with explosives
from like Iraq,
Yeah, like explosives.
And we're not stupid. We know that there have been setups like this where they sent them with explosives and blew them up.
Suicide bombers.
Suicide bombers.
Yeah.
It's their ideology. What does the kid know? He's 6 years old.
So you're faced with this. You're the commander. Right. You're on, this vehicle, right, and you're looking down, saying they could be ready to blow us all up.
So, in the chain of command of the motorcade, we're discussing what on earth are we going to do, and we're obviously, it's not even a question in our head that we're not shooting them. There's no they're civilians. They're not. And I remember we all were speaking on the radio, and we said, these are just kids. I pray they don't take out a gun. I pray that's not an explosive on them.
God.
I till this day, I think about if those kids were to pull out something, and we had to, that would be.
You must have been going crazy. Trying to figure this out.
The adrenaline that was rushing in everybody was at 100 miles an hour, and we called up the chain of command, and we made it to the chain of command of one of the infantry divisions, who were fleeing the civilian population down south, and they said to us, "Oh, those 3 civilians went off the wrong way. Just tell them to go, direct them towards."
So
the
they
right way.
knew about these people. That's amazing. You went through all this trouble to deal with 2 children and a mother who potentially could have had explosives, but the last thing in the world you were interested in was hurting them.
My job is not to go and kill kids and people who look innocent. My job is to kill terrorists And if you're not aiming a gun at me, and if you're not shooting an RPG at me, I got nothing against you. You know, what we want in the IDF, and this goes for each and every single individual in the IDF, we want this war to end. We want our hostages home. We just want to live in peace and quiet. What do we need this nonsense for?
Efraim, you lost a number of your friends, similar age to you.
Yep.
They went into Gaza with you, and they were killed. You told me some of those stories. What is that like for you? I mean, again, I'm looking at you. You're all of 23 now. You were 22 then. How do you, when you put your head down on the pillow every single night, when you think about your friends who were defending the Jewish people, you are the hero of the Jewish people. You and your comrades. There's no two ways about it. You didn't have to do what you did to be a lone soldier, and many of your friends, but you did it because you're part of the Jewish people and you need to be there for the Jewish people. You lost a lot of friends, who were killed, wounded. Tell me from your heart, like, what's that like not to have them anymore?
This is probably the hardest subject I'll ever have to talk about in my life, is the people that I won't be able to have at my wedding one day, or, to go out for a beer with. I never could have imagined losing so many people that I knew at such a young age. 22, 23, and I know over 40 people that were killed, whether it was just from a conversation I had with them or they were my close friends. I remember the first time I really encountered death in Gaza. It was the third day into the invasion, and at the nighttime we had to go and look for a tunnel. Nighttime, night vision, you're sleepless. It's very difficult. And that morning came, the sun rises, and if anyone knows anything about how radical Islamic terrorists fight, sunrise, sunset, worst time. When the twilight comes, you know it's going down. And this was the third day into the invasion, so we didn't really know that. And the sun was rising, and I was under the Givati brigade, under one of their battalions, the Tzabar battalion. And when the sun started to rise, we start to hear on the radio, we see a terrorist in RPG, and you start to hear the whole firefight that's happening. And until this day, I never heard of a firefight crazy in that. There were a couple of terrorists that came out, and I remember on the radio they say he shot the RPG, and you hear it and you see it, and it hit one of the armored APCs. APC is this armored vehicle, armored personnel vehicle, and on the radio you hear, I see it right left of me, just a couple of feet away from me. There are 9 killed, 2 wounded. One of the guys who was wounded sadly did not survive his wounds. And you're just looking to the left of you, and to the left of you was just this armored vehicle. And I'm not getting into detail because I don't want the parents to, if they ever hear this, to hear. But it was just this tragedy. They called it the Mare tragedy.
No, it was. I remember it was one of the worst days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you just see in front of you 10 comrades. I didn't know them, but I followed them hand in hand. And that was the first death that I witnessed when I was in Gaza, and it was just in one shot, 10 men. And it's my third day in Gaza. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it's my third day in. Well,
what did that do to you?
You have to have really, really strong belief. Anyone who went into Gaza will tell you, if you're not believing in God here, you're in the wrong place. And with that belief, with that strength, you keep pushing forward. And for every friend that's killed, it becomes so much more personal. And I guess the most personal story that I have was January 2nd. Again, we're in Darj el Tufah. You ask any soldier who was in Gaza that was in Darj el Tufah, they'll tell you worst place they're ever in. It's the winter, pouring rain. The mud of Gaza was eating the vehicles up. And the day before January 1st, we made it to an intersection where we had like 15 RPGs fired at us. By the grace of God, we were alive. And we were fighting the Nukhba. The Nukhba is the Hamas commandos. They're well trained. They were
the first ones to go in on
the
October
Nukhba
7th.
were the ones who went in first into the kibbutzim and did the horrible massacre. And they were well trained in Afghanistan, in Iran. They were well trained, and they knew what they were doing. And like I said before, they used the infrastructure for terrorism. So they're not firing RPGs from an open area. It's from apartment buildings. The RPG that they were hitting us were from apartment buildings. And there was an RPG that same day that hit the building that we were sleeping in. And they were right next to a cemetery. And then that night, we go into we call it a campground that we were sleeping in, that we created, like a safe campground. And it poured that night. I was so tired I didn't even know it poured. And the morning I wake up, and we're just in this mud puddle. You walk down the street in New York City. If they're in Central Park, you might step in mud. That's not mud, all right. That's a puddle. This, we're talking 10 feet of mud, and we're stuck in it.
Your D9 was stuck in it.
My D9, and then my D9.
The vehicle itself,
yeah.
You couldn't get it out.
And then my D9 partner, he tried to extract me, and in that extraction, he got stuck. So now we're two D9s stuck in the mud. You can't get us out. They had to bring a whole extraction. This turned into a whole extraction mission. They brought excavators. They brought a couple more D9s, and it took hours. Eventually, they extracted my friend, my D9 partner, and he went to the side. Now I'm still stuck. Now the Nukhba, they're watching us. We're surrounded by infrastructure around us, and they're there. They know there's a good time to get them. And a bunch of soldiers were outside of their vehicles because they had to put the chains and the shackles on to extract the vehicles. And all of a sudden we heard gunshots and RPG fired, and it was a full chaos. And I knew something just happened. And I look behind me, and there's about 8 wounded soldiers. I don't even remember how many. And then I see 4 guys from my unit taking a stretcher. And I look by and I see there's a body on it. And at the time, I wasn't able to really. I saw the face and everything, but there was so much adrenaline going on. I wasn't able to identify who it was. And on the radio, they're like to me, "You guys gotta get out of your vehicle. You're not safe because if you're stuck, if you're sitting duck, you're gonna get hit. If you're not moving, you're sitting target, literally sitting target." And I'm like the chain of command. Listen, where am I going? I can't jump out of here. To the right of me is mud. To the left of me is mud. If I jump out, I'll drown in the mud and I'll die. Also 2 stories high up. And the only way I could extract my door was broken. Was from the roof. We have a hatch.
Right.
Now, if I go on the hatch, I'm 2 stories up high. If there's sniper fire, they can see me right away. So it's either I stay here, sit in my vehicle, get hit, and don't make it home, or I climb up in the top hatch, get hit, and don't make it home. And I never really had like fear, where I really thought death was amongst me. This place, I knew the angel of death was just sitting right next to me.
Wow.
And we had to jump out of the vehicle. We went into the nearest building that we were able to, until they were able to kill the terrorists. And we continued the extraction. The extraction took about 7 more hours into the night. And that's when I found out that the person that was killed was my really good friend, Sufyan.
Was a good friend of yours.
One of my closest friends in the army. Sufyan was a Druzi soldier from the Druzi religion in Israel. He wasn't even Jewish.
Sure, wow.
And Sufyan, we were cracking jokes. In the morning, we were cracking jokes. And he sadly didn't make it. And that.
Did you ever think to yourself, when so many of these, like this kind of incident, like, what the hell did I get myself into? Why am I even here?
I knew.
Does that ever cross your mind?
I knew exactly why I was there. October 7th is the answer to why I was there. I knew October 7th was going to happen. I wasn't a question. I knew one day October 7th was going to happen, and I have to be there in case it does happen. And I thank God I was there for when it did happen.
Wow.
Because I had, look, in the last 2,000 years of Jewish history, when did we ever have a military that could stand up for such a massacre? When? It didn't exist. We tried to 2,000 years ago and we failed. You know, when 1939 happened, and September 1st when Hitler invaded Poland, who was standing up for us? Nobody.
Efraim, how incredible. I did a whole bunch of barbecues for Israeli soldiers.
I didn't get it. No, I'm just kidding.
I will take care of you, including in Kiryat Shimona. I mean, I just find the young people in the army like the most amazing young people I could possibly meet. Each and every one of them. I mean, tell us about your comrades, your friends, who are faced with the kind of things that you went through. And again, I'm going back, everybody, we're talking about a 22-year-old faced with what you were faced with. Every single moment, every second, you were in danger, literally. Tell me about the soldiers, the courage, the bravery, the determination.
So, first of all, thank God for our soldiers in Israel. I mean, they really are just such heroic individuals. And I've heard so many stories from people from all different backgrounds in the military who have just such heroic stories, things that we'll probably never even hear because they won't talk about it outside. And this generation, they've told us, you're a generation of social media, you're a generation of TikTok, you're a generation of materialistic things. But in Israel, it's very different. In Israel, it's a culture that you grow up knowing to live life to its fullest. Because you don't know what the next day could be. And when that next day comes, where you getting to live life to your fullest is challenged, and you know that if you don't get up and fight, they'll make it to your door, you know you're not going to have another day to live to the fullest. And it's something that's so deeply embedded within the Israeli society, and I wish for all Jews around the world, but sadly that's not the truth. And in Israel, they live on a daily basis knowing that these neighbors of ours, they ain't too friendly, and they don't really want us. And when you look at these 18, 19, 20-year-olds, 25-year-olds, you listen to even the commanders that are up in the chain, these are people who leave their families, who husbands, wives, fathers, sons, who are willing to risk everything just so that the next generation could live on. And when you're 18 years old, 20, whatever, you stand up at a ceremony, a swearing in ceremony in the military. And part of the swearing ceremony is you have to swear on is that I'm even willing to risk my life. And you're 18 years old and you're swearing on top of your lungs, crying. I remember at my ceremony I was hysterically crying because I knew what my grandparents went through. I knew what my father went through. I knew what my people went through. And you look at the people around you from all walks of life. This is a Yemenite Jew. This is an Ethiopian Jew.
Non-Jews.
These are Druzim. And the Druzim, they're not stupid. They know.
We've lost quite a few of them.
I lost 3 very close Druzi friends.
Wow.
And we know that whether you're Jew, non-Jew, and you're living in Israel, that this is the only free place you have in the entire region. That anyone else who tells you differently is living in a complete lie. The Druzi soldiers, the Christian soldiers, they can't go anywhere else. And they know they live incredible lives. And the Israelis, the Jewish population of Israel, knows that if there is no Israel, there's no future anymore for the Jewish people. Our war is it's not like some other Western country where we can go invade a country, we lose, fine, we'll put our money into our military. If we lose a war, everything that we
They can lose many times. We can't lose once.
We can't afford to lose.
Right, exactly.
We'll die.
Right.
And I'm not willing to lie to my grandparents when I told them never again. I made that promise, and if I have to die in that promise, so be it.
Wow. You mentioned never again. It's something you hear, often in America. Never again, and so on. I want to ask you in terms of your family. I'm a father. I'm a grandfather. I have grandchildren your age. I almost cannot imagine they're in America, like if they were in the front lines the way you were, day in, day out. Front lines, the front. Just share with me your own family. I'm sure they have such great pride in terms of what you're doing, okay? But what is it like for them? Day in, day out, they pick up a newspaper. An Israeli soldier was killed. Before they know the name of the soldier, our son is there. What is it like for them? I spoke to your mother, and she has great pride of what you're doing. But tell me, share with me, and give me an inside scoop in terms of what that's like.
So, I'm an only boy. I have sisters and I don't have any brothers. So, I'm the only one who can pass on the family name. I'm also in combat, so there's always a risk of, God forbid. And my position in the military, if something happens, the chance of something happening is not low. When October 7th happened, outside of Israel, it's a 2-day holiday. I can't really contact my family because they can't use electronics because we're religious. So I didn't know when they were going to find out. But I knew they were going to find out. I knew the community in the States, the word was going to spread somehow. I'm in the Golan already. My father calls me. And I know that he found out.
What did he ask you? What was the first question he asked you? You remember?
I remember they were worried. They weren't. My mother, she had a full breakdown that day.
She had a full breakdown?
A full breakdown because she knew what this meant. And my father he's seen combat before. He's got his war hero stories. And I grew up in a house with him. My father sadly he was wounded in the IDF and his PTSD. So I grew up in this house. And when they heard that this happened, it's almost as if the world changed. It did change. And I want to fast forward to October 27th before I invaded. We got the word that hand your phones in, we're getting ready to invade. It's time to make your last phone calls. And I remember calling my parents up, calling my mother and my father. And you think to yourself, I'm probably never going to speak to them again. And now I'm going to call my father up. Now every father blesses his son. What kind of father is not going to bless his son before he goes to war? And I'll never forget that blessing from my father that I got before I went in. He starts to bless me, and I'm hysterically crying on the inside, but I can't cry. I have soldiers. And they see their commander cry right before we go into war, right before we invade. What's that on the morale? So I swallowed my emotions, and
you swallowed your tears.
Yeah,
right.
And I went into D9. I see my soldier. I was like, all right, let's get ready. Let's get the show on the road. You forget that you just. In Judaism, Maimonides teaches that in Judaism, when one goes to war, he's not allowed to think about his family. Because when he thinks about his family, thoughts begin to rise up. And the moment those emotional thoughts begin to rise up, your mindset in the battlefield changes, and that can kill you. So the entire war, I wasn't thinking about my family, and if I did for a second, I'd shut it off. I would go weeks, 30 days on average without speaking to a single one of my. They wouldn't even know what was going on with me. And in these days, the amount of times I escaped death were, I can't even count how many times. You know, the fact that I'm sitting here right now with you speaking about this in itself is a miracle. I have friends who were still in the hospital fighting for their lives. And here I have my arms and my legs, thank God. And knowing what I went through, you know, I think my parents were a little scared.
Wow, God. Sisters and your sisters, how many sisters do you have?
5 sisters.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, boy, they, same thing, I assume,
Yeah.
right?
The fear that was in the house, look, every morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, Israel time, the IDF would release new names.
Oh, God.
And my parents would, they'd reload the page, hoping it wasn't me. But they don't know that on that page that they were reloading, and one of the names that they saw, I was there. I mean, and they don't know that right next to me, he died, and right next to me on the other side, he was wounded. And somehow you cheated death. And when I was in Gaza, you don't really think, you don't think about death. You can't think about it, But we had a saying in our company, amongst the commanders. There's 2 ways out. It's either you're wounded or you die. Because we knew our job was, we knew we lost a good friend, and almost every commander was wounded at some point. At the end of my 6 months, I was wounded. I was wounded in my back, had a spinal injury, and I truly believe if I would have continued, who knows what would have happened to me.
The job that you had is one of the most difficult. It's constant. When you're on one of those 2-story vehicles, and by the way, how fast are you going on those? I mean, you told me, like, you are moving very, very slowly. It's like never ending. Right. It's like, when am I getting there? You're not getting there. It's like, that's what you're doing, slow. What's that like? It has the greatest effect, I know, on the soldiers.
So, and I say this in the most humble of ways. I don't say this in any way to be cocky. The men of the D9 warriors, they truly have the most difficult job on the ground forces in Gaza. Because our job is 24/7. We don't get to stop. It doesn't exist. Because every second we stop is a second longer the enemy gets to live, and a second longer the hostages are in the tunnel. So we can't afford to stop. And every second we take to ourselves, it can even cost our friends' lives. Because that infrastructure that wasn't destroyed, a Hamas terrorist is going to come out of there, out of the school, out of the mosque, out of the hospital.
God, what a burden on you and the men.
It's the most stressful job. I'm 22 years old. I'm commanding over a D9. And sometimes it's even over 4 D9s. And you're sitting down with lieutenant colonels, with high-ranking generals, and you're planning strategically on the battle and how you're gonna overcome it. What engineering techniques you're gonna do. And you're 22, 23, and you're sitting with the guys who are 20 years in the military already, and they're asking you because you're the expert in the field in this field,
engineering, etc.
Right. And you know that if you don't do the job right, there are men who aren't going to make it home to their families.
Right. You're saving lives.
The D9, and again I say this in the most humble of ways, the men of the D9s are probably the men who saved the most lives in Gaza out of any other unit.
Wow.
We're also tasked with extracting vehicles because we're such a powerful vehicle that if a vehicle gets stuck, it has to be extracted. I mean, there was one time where I remember I went to sleep. It was 12 o'clock at night. I went to sleep. I was sleeping in a building. I got into the sleeping bag. My company commander walks in 12 o'clock at night. I just finished a days of work. About to go to sleep. There's a vehicle stuck in hostile territory. We need to go. I open my sleeping bag. All right, we're going. I take my soldier. We get into the vehicle. 6 o'clock in the morning. 12 o'clock at night. 3 hours took us to get there. 3 hours. If you can drive in America 3 hours, you're probably going to 5 different states. Right here on the East Coast. But in Gaza, you're driving 3 hours with the D9. You're going about 5 kilometers an hour.
Very slow.
And it's nighttime. You're no lights. You have night vision. 3 hours took us to get. We went the 3 hours down south. We get to this tank, and there are other tanks.
Tank was stuck.
The tank was stuck. There are other tanks around it, who are covering, giving cover fire. We make it. It took us about 20 seconds to extract the vehicle, and 3 hours back. We made it sunrise. That's one example of extracting vehicles. Wow. Under hostile territory. I must have extracted hundreds of vehicles, and each vehicle has at least 4, maybe even 10 people in it.
I want to go back to our discussion about the uniqueness of the Army of the Jewish People, the IDF, their moral standard, and everything that was done to because this is such an issue in the media, as you know. I want to talk a little more about that for you to share with me. You made a statement to me saying basically that they're all terrorists. Okay, now, and at the same time, you're protecting civilians. You told us about that. Your unit is being very careful with children, with women, and others. You're making a path for them to be able to go to a safe area. Talk to me about how special. I mean, you've mentioned dropping leaflets, phone calls, announcements, whatever. And still, the Jewish army is being accused of look what they're doing. Look at all the innocent people.
So, I used to tell my soldiers a sentence. Before you can be a warrior, you have to be a soldier. And before you can be a soldier, you have to be a human being. Without being a human being, you can't be any of the other ones. And that's specifically for the IDF. We all grew up in Jewish homes, whether they're religious, not religious, but we all grew up with Jewish value. And Jewish value is not to massacre, murder, obliterate innocent individuals. It's not. If you're going to kill me, I'm going to kill you. It's as simple as that.
Let me just say that's a very what you're saying is so beautiful and so true. You're dealing with an enemy that committed the worst atrocities in the history of the world. That's who you're dealing with, okay? You're dealing with Hamas, you're dealing with civilians who raped, who burned babies, who did things that are beyond comprehension for the human brain, okay? And here you're telling me, and it's beautiful, the values of the Jewish soldier. It's not hate. You had a job to do. Period. It's amazing.
Look, I'll give you an example that we had in Gaza. We were evacuating the civilian population down south. We were by Gaza City. And we're with our motorcade of vehicles. And we made it to an old age home. Now, they're old. They stayed there till the last second that they were able to because they couldn't evacuate. And the nurses stayed with them as well. And there was one old lady who couldn't move more than 3 feet without struggling. And one of the company commanders that was with us in our motorcade, Jala Ibrahim, a Druzi soldier, a Druzi commander, who sadly he was killed a few months ago. And Jala was one of the most incredible individuals I ever met in my life. At the middle of this chaos, where on that block a soldier was killed, on this block there are terrorists, he's translating from Arabic to Hebrew where we could find them a wheelchair so we can evacuate them. You go to any other military in the world, you know what they're doing to that lady? She's a burden. They're going to shoot her. No, we're not going to do that. We tried to find even an office chair with wheels on it just to evacuate it.
How old was this person, do you think?
She must have been in her 70s and her 80s. Now, she's in her 70s. She's lived life, you know. She's older than Hamas itself. And I remember a few feet next to her was this old man sitting on a log. And he had a water bottle from Israel. Why? The water bottle was given from an Israeli soldier who threw it to him because he saw he was dehydrated. Now, I could give you an even better example. In the same vicinity, the same day actually this happened, or the same 2 days, it was a Friday, and we were evacuating the civilian population. Now, we were with the Special Forces unit. I'm not going to say which unit. And again, our D9 got stuck, whatever. We did the whole extraction to get it out. And right next to us is this maybe 10-story building. And this special unit goes in and evacuates the people in the building. And one by one, they're going out of the building. And there must have been at least 200 people in this building. And they're separating the men from the women, because the men are going to be the Hamas population. And the children and the women were put into the side. Now each person has to have a pat down and make sure there's nothing, no explosives. Because a few blocks away, there was an old man who came out with an explosive vest and blew himself up. So this was about 2 blocks away. Now when they were evacuating, when they were separating these people, they were taking off their clothing to make sure they didn't have any explosives on them. I remember seeing the men and the children. You're never going to hear this anywhere else because this was never reported. The men were heavier. Some were chubbier, some were just thicker. The children were stick thin. You could see their bones. Why? Because the people who get to eat, those are going to be the people who get to fight. And it's also an incentive. You want to eat? Support Hamas. Become a fighter. And the kids are stick thin. And the men, it looks like they just got out of 12 different Thanksgiving dinners. The children, it looks like they just got out of the world's worst human crisis.
Is there any doubt in your mind, based on your experience of being there, that the civilian population basically supports Hamas, or is that not, or they have no choice because if you do anything against them, you're dead? Is there any hope for the civilian population in Gaza in terms of the future of getting rid of Hamas?
Look, I'm not an idiot. I know what Gaza is and what's there. I saw it with my own eyes. Every house I entered, every school. For 20 years, Gaza was this isolated place. No Israelis were allowed in, but Gazans were allowed out. And anything that went into Gaza was through an ideology of Hamas, whether it was financial aid, humanitarian aid, medical supplies, education. And you see these kids. Look, when the disengagement from Gaza happened, I was 5 years old, 4 or 5 years old. Let's take a 4 or 5 year old from Gaza during the disengagement. He doesn't really remember. He remembers just like I do, Well, I remember orange protests. He remembers probably Israelis evacuating Jews from their homes. Now, in that 20-year timeline, Hamas is controlling his life. Everything he does, where he learns, where he buys his food, where his parents go get gas from the gas station, that's all ran by Hamas. The summer camps that the kids go to, it's all Hamas summer camps. The local town affairs that are happening are all ran by Hamas. And if you go down the streets of Gaza, you see Hamas advertisements, Islamic Jihad advertisements, and I have pictures of each and every single advertisement that I stumbled across, because I know someday someone's going to say, that didn't happen, but I saw it happen. And now, like I said before, I'm not going to go and kill a civilian. But I'm also not stupid. I know when the age comes, and he's 16, 17, 20, 30, he's going to bear arms. And he's going to pick them up against me, against my kids. And he's going to come and kill me. In the name of jihad. Now, I don't raise my kids. I don't have kids, but please God, when I do, I'm not going to raise them
To hate anybody.
to murder people. I'm going to teach them to defend innocent individuals from these radical monsters. In the schools that we went to, in the homes, look, education comes from the home. You could send your kid to a million schools, and at the end of the day, where you grew up is where the education's coming from. And you walk in to these homes in Gaza, which, by the way, a lot of them were beautiful homes. They told you in the news that they live in slums.
Right, right.
Let me tell you something. I wish my house looked like some of their homes. And you walk into these homes, and you see the books, their libraries, and you see what they're teaching them. Jihad, anti-West, death to America, the Jews are the main problem in the world. They're not teaching them the ABCs. They're not teaching them these regular things that a kid should know.
They're not teaching them about a two-state solution?
Two states. You're thinking about a one-state solution called
Right,
eradicate the
right,
Jews.
right.
I stumbled across, I was in a Hamas leader's home. I don't remember who the Hamas leader was. It was along the beach. And what fascinated me the most was his library, to see what the education was. And I'm just looking at all the books to see, and most of them in Arabic I don't understand, but whatever has pictures or imagery of something I could tell is extremist, I took for myself. And I stumbled across one book. This book was a summer camp pamphlet from 2013. Keep in mind, this was before the last Gaza war. And I'm going through the pages, and it's pictures of what it's like. And in the pictures, I'm seeing an extremist imam, the Hamas council, and they're going and visiting them, obviously. And in one picture, what I stumbled across, they're teaching them to shoot AK-47s. We're talking about 30 groups, and these are 10-year-olds. 2013, those people in the magazine, in this pamphlet, are my age today. Where were they on October 7th? They were probably bearing arms, because that was the education they had from the home. Yeah. So, I know...
If you teach people hate, they will hate. Right. Plain and simple.
So I know my enemy, and I know they might not be holding a gun right now, but I know they're extremists, and I know that if I was alone amongst them, they wouldn't kill me. They'd torture me. You take one of them and put them alone amongst us, you know what they're going to do? They're going to try to kill as many as they can before they die. That's the difference.
Right. Oh, wow. Let me ask you, I know that you mentioned to me that you were injured, and thank God you're okay. Any desire to go back to be with the men that you're so close to?
Look, war is the worst thing.
You've done your share.
The share is still not over. But war is the greatest thing and the worst thing a man will ever go through. The worst thing, you're a human being. The things a human being should not have to see in their lifetime. Friends dying, innocent individuals dying, having to fear for their lives. But why is it also the greatest? The camaraderie and the brotherhood that comes out of war. It's beyond any other relationship I can explain.
Wow. Uh-huh.
To know that this man sitting to the left of you and this man sitting to the right of you is the one who's going to get you out of here alive, and you're the one who's going to get him out of here alive, it creates a bond like no other. Now, my friends from civilian world versus my friends from my military world, they're two different groups of people. The ones from the military world are the only ones who will truly understand what I went through, and I'm willing to go back again. And please God, if the time arises, if I have to, I'll go again and fight hand to hand with them again.
Wow. Let me ask you to sort of close this with everything going on. Situation's not over in the South. A lot is happening in the North. What is your message to American Jews? American Jews, they're generous, they give, they're involved, but it's a whole different level, obviously, when you compare it to the people of Israel, all the people of Israel, and in particular, young people. And it's not just, Ephraim, you in the front lines, which is the ultimate. It's everyone in your family that has to live with that. Your sisters, your mother, your father, your relatives, your friends, etc. It's like a whole universe. If you could talk to the American Jewish community, what would you say to them? Is there anything lacking? Are you happy with the situation, the way their part? Are we carrying our burden here in America while you guys are on the front lines? How do you feel?
So look, I guess I have to answer not only for the American Jewish population, but also for the entire American population.
Good.
We in the West have isolated ourselves from what is in the East. We don't truly understand that there's other cultures in this world. And we can't understand that there is this evil because we live in such good. But that evil exists. And October 7th happened. And it wasn't a one-time event, October 7th. October 7th needs to be taken for every single individual in the United States. It needs to be taken as an example for what's coming. Because this enemy isn't stopping at Israel.
Are you talking about radical Islam?
I'm talking about radical Islam.
Okay, let's define it. Radical Islam.
This enemy is nothing will stop this enemy from getting to your house like it did on October 7th in Israel. And we here in America need to wake up and realize, 9/11 happened, but something far greater is at our doors. And to the American Jewish population, look, the best way I could say this, I compare my grandparents' generation, who were a generation of World War II heroes, versus my peers here in the States. When my grandparents turned 18, they were drafted to the United States Army. And my grandfather, thank God he's still alive, he's 101 years old, he's living in Israel. He went on the General Patton's Third Army to go and fight the Nazis. My grandmother, my late grandmother, she escaped in 1938 as a teenager, Nazi Germany. She lost her whole community. My other grandfather lost his whole family in the Holocaust. And this generation, the greatest generation in the Jewish community, were warriors. 2-3 generations later, I look at my Jewish peers. They can't even defend themselves. They don't even know how to fight. We've lost who we are in the diaspora that is here in the United States. And if you compare an Israeli Jew to an American Jew, night and day the difference. An Israeli Jew, you say something to him, he's going to stand up for himself. He's not scared. And here in America, not only do I think that they're scared, I don't think they're scared. I think they live in such a bubble that they don't understand that they're under threat. You go onto social media and you look at the comments, the majority of the comments are against Jews. And this is on the left, on the right. We're seeing it from every single corner. And if the Jews in America don't start waking up, 1938, 1939 is right around the corner for us as well.
Wow.
And it's here. And if we don't rise up against it and stand with Israel and go back to our patriotic American ideologies, because those are Judeo-Christian ideologies, we'll lose every single thing we have. And when we lose it, good luck getting it back.
Is America in trouble as well?
America is in trouble. America is in this culture war. And this culture war is killing the West. Look, the whole world went to war. And America is just standing behind, watching it happen. Feeding the money. And people are dying. When America is weak, the West is weak. And when the West is weak, the evils in the world will do anything it can to win. And that's where we are right now.
Wow. Thank you so much, really. We've been part of the same family, but now that we've spent time together, I feel your heart and soul, and I love you.
Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely.